What would you do if a single night changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? For a man who'd always considered himself straight, stepping into a bar on a whim was meant to be just a pit stop in a chaotic night. But when his eyes met a cowboy, all rugged confidence, a teasing smirk, and a body that seemed sculpted from a daydream, he couldn't look away. Suddenly, the bar wasn't just a bar, and the man wasn't just another face in the crowd. This was a story of unexpected attraction, of questioning boundaries, and of discovering a connection so raw and magnetic that it couldn't be ignored. When straight meets sexy in a place where rules don't apply, the only certainty is that nothing will ever be the same. The night started like any other wild outing with friends. Brandon hadn't planned to drink so much, but the cocktails at his friend Jake's party had gone down too easily. Somewhere between the shots and the pounding music, he'd lost track of his group. Now, stumbling through the unfamiliar streets of downtown Austin, he was more tipsy than he cared to admit. His phone was dead, and calling an Uber was out of the question. The neon glow of a bar caught his attention. A drink to sober up, he thought, stepping inside. The moment he walked in, Brandon knew something was different. The air was charged, almost electric, and the bass of the music thrummed through his chest. He glanced around, his vision slightly blurred, but clear enough to notice the pairs of men dancing together, his brow furrowed in mild confusion. It wasn't until his eyes landed on the bar that he saw him, a man who didn't just command attention, he owned it. The stranger leaned casually against the counter, sipping a beer. A cowboy hat shaded his face slightly, but not enough to hide the sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes. His shirt clung to his broad chest, the top few buttons undone, revealing just enough skin to leave little to the imagination. Brandon swallowed hard, an unfamiliar flutter stirring in his stomach. The man looked up, caught Brandon's gaze, and smirked. A slow, knowing curve of his lips that sent a jolt through him. Feeling unsteady but compelled, Brandon approached the bar. "Hey," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "Rough night?" The cowboy's voice was low, smooth, and carried a faint southern drawl that made Brandon's heart skip a beat. "Something like that," Brandon admitted, glancing away nervously. He wasn't sure why he felt like he was under a spotlight. Just needed a drink. The cowboy chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Brandon's spine. "Well, you came to the right place. Name's Cole, by the way." He extended a hand, and Brandon shook it, his palm warm against the roughness of Cole's. "I'm Brandon," he replied. Before he knew it, Cole had ordered 2 beers, sliding one over to him. They clinked bottles, and Brandon couldn't help but notice how his own hand trembled slightly. As they drank, the conversation flowed easily, and Brandon felt himself loosening up. He told Cole about his disastrous night, losing his friends and wandering into the bar by accident. Cole listened intently, his eyes never leaving Brandon's face. "So, you didn't know this was a gay bar?" Cole asked, an amused glint in his eye. Brandon froze. No," he admitted, glancing around. For the first time, he truly took in his surroundings, the couples kissing, the rainbow flag above the bar, the drag queen performing on stage. His cheeks flushed. "I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it," he added quickly. Cole laughed, a deep, hearty laugh that somehow eased Brandon's embarrassment. "Relax, man. You're good. It's not like they're gonna throw you out for being straight." Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Was that what he was? Straight? The flutter in his chest every time Cole smiled made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Brandon shifted uncomfortably on his bar stool, gripping his beer bottle a little too tightly. Cole's presence was magnetic, drawing him in despite the warning sirens blaring in his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. He'd walked into this bar by accident, not looking for anything, especially not this. So, what brings a guy like you into a place like this? Cole asked, resting an elbow on the bar and leaning in slightly. His cowboy hat tilted just enough to give Brandon an unobstructed view of those piercing blue eyes. They were playful, but seemed to be searching for something deeper. Brandon hesitated. I was just wandering around, lost track of my friends. Thought I'd grab a drink. His voice cracked slightly, and he cursed himself for sounding so unsure. Cole smirked, clearly enjoying Brandon's discomfort. Well, seems like fate brought you here. Lucky me. The playful tone in his voice sent a shiver down Brandon's spine, and he looked away, his cheeks heating. Fate's got a weird sense of humor, Brandon muttered, taking another long sip of his beer to avoid saying something stupid. He wasn't sure why he was even sitting here, talking to this man who made him feel things he'd never felt before. You can relax, you know, Cole said, his voice softer now. I don't bite, unless you want me to. He chuckled, and Brandon couldn't help but laugh nervously. The conversation shifted into safer territory. Music, movies, and the chaos of Austin nightlife. Brandon found himself easing up, the alcohol smoothing out his nerves. He even managed to make Cole laugh with a story about a failed attempt to grill steaks during a camping trip with his friends. Cole's laughter was contagious, a deep, rich sound that made Brandon's chest feel warm. But as the night wore on, the air between them grew heavier. The casual touches, Cole brushing his hand against Brandon's arm as he leaned in to talk, their knees bumping under the bar, were no longer accidental. Brandon could feel his heartbeat quicken every time Cole's gaze lingered on him just a little too long. You know, Cole said after a moment of silence, I don't think you're as lost as you think you are. Brandon frowned, confused. What do you mean? Cole leaned in closer, his voice low and intimate. Sometimes we find ourselves in places we didn't expect because it's exactly where we're supposed to be. The words hung in the air, and Brandon couldn't look away from Cole's eyes. There was something there, something that felt like an invitation, a promise, and a challenge all at once. His breath hitched, and for a moment, he forgot how to speak. Brandon started, but his words were interrupted by the loud cheer of the crowd as the drag queen finished her performance. The moment shattered, and Brandon quickly looked away, feeling like he'd just been caught doing something he shouldn't. Cole didn't push. Instead, he smiled softly and tipped his hat. Another drink? He asked, motioning to Brandon's empty bottle. Brandon nodded, grateful for the excuse to focus on something else. But as Cole signaled the bartender, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted, and he wasn't sure if he wanted it to go back to the way it was. By the time Cole handed Brandon another beer, the crowd in the bar had thickened, the music pulsing louder. Brandon was aware of the heat in the room, but most of it seemed to radiate from Cole. The cowboy was leaning in closer now, his presence filling Brandon's senses. Every word, every smirk, every touch of his hand on Brandon's arm felt like a deliberate test of boundaries, and Brandon wasn't sure if he wanted to pass or fail. "You're quieter now," Cole observed, his voice steady but low enough that it forced Brandon to lean in to hear him over the music. "What's on your mind?" Brandon hesitated, unsure how to put into words the storm brewing inside him. "I don't know," he admitted. "This is just new for me." Cole's brow lifted slightly, and a knowing smile tugged at his lips. "New doesn't have to be bad," he said. "Sometimes new is just what we need." Brandon's stomach flipped. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Cole said them. Like he knew exactly what Brandon was feeling. It was unnerving and comforting all at once. He took another swig of his beer, trying to steady himself. "So, what about you?" Brandon asked, attempting to shift the focus off himself. "Why are you here tonight?" Cole chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "Same reason as everyone else, I guess. Looking for a good time. Maybe something more." His eyes locked onto Brandon's, and the weight of those words hung in the air between them. Brandon's mouth went dry. He glanced around the bar, looking for an escape, but instead, his gaze landed on the dance floor. Men danced in pairs, their bodies moving together like they were made for each other. Others were leaning into each other at the edges of the room, some sharing kisses that were anything but discreet. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just any bar. It was a gay bar. Brandon stammered, suddenly feeling out of place. "I don't think I'm supposed to be here." Cole tilted his head, his expression calm and unreadable. "Why not?" "Because I'm not." Brandon struggled for the words, his heart racing. "I'm not gay." Cole didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his smirk softening into something more understanding. "Okay," he said simply, taking a sip of his beer. "But you're here now, and we're talking, so why not stay a little longer?" Brandon blinked, caught off guard by Cole's easygoing response. He had expected judgment or teasing, but there was none of that, just an open invitation to stay in the moment. Against his better judgment, he found himself nodding. "Yeah, I guess one more drink won't hurt." "Nada, boy," Cole said, raising his bottle in a mock toast. Brandon couldn't help but laugh, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Cole had a way of disarming him, breaking down the walls he didn't even realize he'd built. As they continued talking, Brandon felt a strange mix of emotions bubbling to the surface. Curiosity, fear, excitement. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Cole, even though his mind screamed at him to walk away. But the more they talked, the harder it became to imagine leaving. At some point, Cole reached out, his fingers brushing against Brandon's hand on the bar. It was a simple gesture, almost casual, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Brandon's entire body. He looked up, meeting Cole's gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away. "Do you want to dance?" Cole asked, his voice low and inviting. Brandon's breath caught. He wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or the moment, but he found himself nodding. "Yeah, I think I do." Brandon followed Cole onto the dance floor, his heart pounding louder than the bass vibrating through the room. The crowd seemed to fade into the background as they stepped into the swirl of bodies. The lights flashed in blues and reds, casting shadows across Cole's face, making his smirk even more enticing. Brandon wasn't a dancer, not really, but something about the way Cole moved made him want to try. Cole turned to face him, his movements fluid and unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. "Relax," Cole said, leaning close enough for Brandon to hear over the music. "It's just dancing." "Yeah, I'm not exactly good at this," Brandon admitted, his voice tinged with self-consciousness. He stood stiffly, unsure where to place his hands or how to move without feeling awkward. Cole laughed softly, the sound melting some of Brandon's tension. Don't think so hard. Just feel the music. Let it guide you. Brandon took a deep breath and tried to mimic Cole's rhythm. At first, it felt foreign, his body reluctant to let go of the inhibitions that held him back. But as the minutes passed, he found himself falling into the beat, his body syncing with Cole's. It wasn't long before Cole's hands found his hips, guiding him gently, and Brandon realized he didn't mind. The proximity was intoxicating. Brandon could feel the heat radiating from Cole's body, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the musk of the room. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Cole's gaze was steady, unwavering, and it made Brandon's stomach flip. "See?" Cole said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down Brandon's spine. "You're a natural." Brandon laughed nervously, but the compliment warmed him in ways he couldn't explain. "Maybe it's just the teacher." Cole's grin widened. "Could be." The music shifted to something slower, sultry, and the space between them shrank. Brandon's heart raced as Cole moved closer, their bodies nearly touching now. The room seemed to blur, the lights and sounds fading until all Brandon could focus on was the man in front of him. "Is this still new for you?" Cole asked, his voice soft but teasing. His hands rested lightly on Brandon's hips, not demanding but there, grounding him. Brandon swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Yeah," he admitted, "but it doesn't feel wrong." Cole's expression softened, his smirk replaced by something more genuine. "That's because it's not," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. "Sometimes the best things in life don't fit into the boxes we've built for ourselves." Before Brandon could respond, Cole leaned in, his lips brushing against Brandon's ear. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through him. Brandon's breath hitched, his body frozen in a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Can I kiss you?" Cole asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Brandon's world spun. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to say no, to walk away, to hold on to the identity he'd always known. But the pull toward Cole was undeniable, magnetic. Without thinking, he nodded. Cole didn't hesitate. His lips met Brandon's in a kiss that was firm yet tender, confident yet careful. It was nothing like Brandon had imagined. Not that he'd ever imagined this. It was better. It was real. And it sent a wave of heat coursing through him, leaving him breathless. When they pulled apart, Brandon stared at Cole, his mind reeling. He couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. But one thing was clear. Nothing about this felt like a mistake. Cole smiled, his thumb brushing lightly against Brandon's jaw. "You're full of surprises, Brandon." Brandon laughed, though it was shaky. "Yeah, tell me about it." Brandon's mind buzzed with a mix of adrenaline and confusion as he followed Cole back to the bar. The kiss still lingered on his lips, a sensation both foreign and electric. He didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't just the act itself. It was how natural it had felt. How, for a fleeting moment, everything seemed to align. Cole slid onto a stool, motioning for Brandon to sit beside him. "You doing okay?" Cole asked, his voice soft but laced with concern. Brandon hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I think so. It's just a lot to take in." Cole chuckled, sipping his beer. "I get it. First times can be overwhelming." Brandon flushed, unsure how to respond. He toyed with the edge of his bottle, avoiding Cole's gaze. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Life rarely goes according to plan, Cole replied. But sometimes, that's where the magic happens. Brandon finally looked up, meeting Cole's steady gaze. There was no judgment there, no pressure, just an openness that made Brandon feel strangely safe. You're different, Brandon said, surprising even himself with the admission. Cole raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a playful smile. I'll take that as a compliment. It is, Brandon said quickly. I mean, I've never met anyone like you before. Cole leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Well, I guess you've been hanging out in the wrong places. Brandon laughed despite himself, the tension in his chest easing. Maybe I have. Their conversation shifted, flowing naturally as they shared more about themselves. Cole talked about growing up on a ranch outside Austin, his love for horses, and the freedom he felt under the wide Texas sky. Brandon found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing stories about his childhood, his job in marketing, and even the recent breakup that had left him questioning everything. I guess I came out tonight to distract myself, Brandon admitted, swirling the last of his beer in the bottle. Didn't think I'd end up here. Cole nodded, his gaze understanding. Heartbreak has a way of leading us to unexpected places. Sometimes, those places are exactly where we're supposed to be. Brandon didn't know what to say to that. The weight of Cole's words settled over him, sinking deep into the parts of himself he usually kept guarded. He glanced around the bar, taking in the laughter, the music, the couple swaying together on the dance floor. It felt like a different world, one he hadn't known existed until tonight. Do you regret it? Cole asked, breaking the silence. Brandon blinked, startled by the question. Regret what? Coming here. Kissing me. Cole's tone was casual, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes that caught Brandon off guard. Brandon hesitated, his heart pounding. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The chaos of the party, the empty streets, the neon sign that had drawn him in. And then he thought about Cole, his easy smile, his steady presence, and the way he made Brandon feel seen in a way he hadn't before. No, Brandon said finally, his voice steady. I don't regret it. Cole's smile was slow and genuine, and it sent a warmth through Brandon's chest. Good, Cole said, because neither do I. As the night deepened, the crowd in the bar began to thin, but Brandon and Cole stayed rooted in their spots. Brandon couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so comfortable talking to someone, or so seen. There was something about Cole's easy confidence that made him feel like he could say anything without fear of judgment. So, what now? Brandon asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Cole tilted his head, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Well, that depends. Do you want to keep talking, or are you up for a little adventure? Brandon arched an eyebrow. What kind of adventure? Cole smirked, his cowboy hat casting a playful shadow over his face. Relax, city boy. Nothing too wild. I'm just asking if you want to get some fresh air. The invitation felt like a lifeline. The bar, while intoxicatingly vibrant, was beginning to feel a little too close, the weight of the night pressing in on Brandon. Yeah, he said, standing up. Fresh air sounds good. Cole led the way, weaving through the tables and out the door. The cool night air hit Brandon's face like a splash of water, clearing his mind just enough to make him realize how buzzed he still was. The neon lights of the bar cast a glow onto the sidewalk, but it felt quieter out here, more intimate. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the city alive with the distant hum of cars and the occasional burst of laughter from other bars. Brandon found himself glancing at Cole more than once, his heart doing strange little flips every time their eyes met. "You okay?" Cole asked, breaking the silence. Brandon nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, just processing, I guess." Cole smiled, his gaze softening. "It's a lot, huh?" "Yeah," Brandon admitted, "but it's not bad, just different." They stopped at a small park, the kind with a few benches and a scattering of trees that seemed almost out of place in the middle of the city. Cole leaned against a lamppost, his hat tipped back slightly, giving Brandon a clear view of his face. "You know," Cole said, his tone thoughtful, "different isn't always something to be afraid of." Brandon leaned against a nearby bench, his arms crossed over his chest. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," Cole said simply, "but nothing worth having ever is." Brandon looked down at the ground, the weight of Cole's words sinking in. "Do you always talk like you've got everything figured out?" he asked, his tone teasing but not unkind. Cole laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Not even close," he admitted. "But I've learned a thing or two along the way. Like how sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them." Their eyes met again, and this time Brandon didn't look away. The tension between them crackled like static electricity, pulling them closer. Before he could second-guess himself, Brandon took a step forward. "Cole," he said, his voice low and steady. "Yeah?" Cole's voice was barely above a whisper. Brandon hesitated, the words caught in his throat. But then he remembered the way Cole had looked at him on the dance floor, the way his touch had felt like both a question and an answer, and he realized he didn't need words to say what he was feeling. Instead, he leaned in, closing the distance between them. Their lips met again, this time slower, more deliberate. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an exploration, a surrender, a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Brandon felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The walk back to the bar was quiet, but not awkward. Brandon felt like the air between them had shifted, the tension replaced by something softer. He couldn't stop replaying the kiss in his mind. How natural it had felt. How right. "I should probably get going," Brandon said reluctantly as they reached the front of the bar. Cole nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fair enough. But you don't have to figure everything out tonight." Brandon gave him a small smile. "I'll keep that in mind." They exchanged numbers before parting ways. Brandon walked home, his mind buzzing with everything that had happened. By the time he reached his apartment, he wasn't sure if it had all been real or if it had just been a dream. The next morning, Brandon stared at his phone, Cole's number glowing on the screen. Should he text him? What would he even say? "Morning, man," came a text from Jake, one of Brandon's friends. "What happened to you last night? You just disappeared." Brandon sighed, typing back a vague reply. He wasn't ready to share what had happened. Hell, he wasn't even sure what it meant. As the day wore on, flashes of Cole's smile, his laugh, and his words kept breaking through Brandon's thoughts. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt, but the questions swirling in his mind were relentless. That evening, Brandon finally worked up the courage to text Cole. "Hey, it's Brandon. Thanks for last night. It was unexpected, but in a good way. The reply came quickly. Hey, Cowboy. Glad to hear from you. Unexpected isn't so bad, huh? Brandon smiled, his chest tightening with a mix of nerves and excitement. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to find out. And as he lay in bed that night, staring at the glow of his phone, he realized that sometimes the best moments in life aren't planned. They're the ones you let yourself feel. So, what did you think of Brandon and Cole's story? From the chance encounter in a bar to the unexpected connection that flipped Brandon's world upside down, this tale was all about stepping out of comfort zones and embracing the unknown. Was it the romance you were rooting for? Did the twists keep you hooked? We want to hear from you. Drop your rating from 1 to 10 in the comments and tell us why. What stood out to you? Was it the chemistry between the characters, the emotional journey, or the sheer unpredictability of the night? Or maybe you have ideas on what could have made it even better. Your feedback helps us create more stories that resonate with you. So don't hold back. Let us know your thoughts. And if you're craving more stories like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and stick around for the next one. Who knows where the next adventure will take us?